start, we're gonna start, so if we can hurry with the orders, if you're gonna order, if you can wait till after, then that's good too.
Okay, it's going.
So, we're live on Periscope right now, so we're gonna begin. Okay. So, Julian actually flew in from DC on his way back to California, and I originally met Julian at the Network for Public Education conference in Texas, and he was working at the University of Texas. And actually, I was having some hardship here in Vegas with what's going on with Nevada Succeeds and all the things that we have going on. And so Sonia Horsford had picked up on that on Twitter and invited me to come out there, and I didn't really know at the time what Network for Public Education was too much. So I went out there and got to meet Julian, and Julian is like the TFA expert, like nationally. He's created some great documents I'd love you to talk about too that we could put forward to the board, because I haven't gotten around to that whole idea. But of course TFA here is like a huge thing for us, because we're the only other place that I know of besides Chicago that they actually were laying off teachers at the same time they were hiring TFA. So that conflict was directly here, but it doesn't go down as much as Chicago because we brought ours back in and Chicago didn't. But we have been at that point. So TFA is an interesting topic that you are like supreme of knowledge, you know, and we are the second that got that. So I asked Julian when he was in town, because he comes into town a lot, if he would come by and talk to us about some of these things so we can get our footing on the national type things that are going on. Of course, you guys know I fly all over the place, but bringing people to us is very helpful because we don't have money to all be flying everywhere. So we appreciate Julian coming in, and I think he will do a little bit of his own, you know, biography too, because I know you have a long list of.
Oh, sure.
So thank you, Julian, for coming.
Great. So I'm going to move this, hopefully, to a good spot here. So I'm glad to join up a little. Perfect.
Got a great view of your chin.
Yeah. Great view. Maybe if we push it back.
Yeah, no, it's the angle.
How's that?
I don't know if I can get it to stay. Slide. There you go.
There we go. Perfect.
There you go.
Stay.
Great. So I'm glad to be here with the LEAD Caucus. I'm actually coming back from NEA in DC. I was at one of the quarterly board meetings for the NEA Foundation. So super glad to do it on the way back home. So I'll tell you quickly about my biography, what I do. I was at Texas for 8 years. I taught in the superintendency program and the public policy planning program. I'm now at Cal State, where I'm a professor of educational leadership and policy studies. And I also direct the doctorate in ed leadership, so the folks that end up becoming superintendents, other leaders in higher education. I was also recently elected the education chair for the California NAACP. But of course, all opinions that I express are those of my own and not any of the institutions that I'm affiliated with. So just really glad to be here in Las Vegas. I consider Las Vegas essentially a second home. It's a really wonderful place. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, in fact, so just after Thanksgiving. So I just wanted this to be a question and answer time and talk about the topics that you want to talk about. Two that have just come up in conversation recently are vouchers. Now that Nevada's thinking about vouchers, we've done a lot of research on vouchers, so we can talk a little bit about what the research says on vouchers, and then get you information so that you can give that to legislators, give that to community folks. Another important topic clearly in Nevada is, did I say that right?
No.
Nevada. And Nevada is I can never remember which it is.
Sierra Nevada. The state is Nevada.
Nevada. Got it. Okay.
Which is hard for the Spanish teacher to say.
Right. So, and it's Teach for America. This is a really important hot topic. You mentioned Chicago. It was not only Chicago where they laid off teachers, but they also laid off hundreds of black teachers in New Orleans and replaced them with non-folks of color from TFA. So this is sort of a broader based conversation. There's also TFA's broader involvement in the school privatization movement. Although they don't believe that they're part of the school privatization movement, it's very clear that they are pawns in that conversation. And we can talk about some of those different aspects of the school privatization movement and how they are part of that, either unwittingly or wittingly. Some of them are very wittingly involved with it, but there are, I think, core members that don't realize that they're a part of a broader movement. In fact, the Walton Foundation, Walmart, just gave TFA just a few days ago $50 million just for the southern region. And you know who partners up with the Walton Foundation. You know what kind of working conditions that the Walton Foundation has in their Walmart stores. You can go to YouTube and you can see plenty. I've actually broke my association, my consumer association with Walmart a few years ago when I wrote a blog post on Cloaking Equity about Walmart and realized how bad things really were for the workers at Walmart. And those are the folks that are funding Teach for America, the Walmarts, the Gates, those folks. So where would you guys like to start? What topic would you like to start on?
On that same topic, can you discuss what you had created for those documents to turn into the board to get transparency on TFA?
Sure. So the thing is that Teach for America, they believe that they're civil rights organizers or civil rights proponents, right? But what we used to say that sending untrained, unqualified teachers to only teach poor kids, we used to actually call that discrimination. But somehow Teach for America has transformed the conversation from sending uncertified and unqualified teachers to teach primarily poor kids, whether they be white, whether they be black, Latino, Asian. They've somehow transformed that idea into civil rights. It's actually something that they've been very clever. They've done this for vouchers. They've done this, and vouchers were created for segregation purposes. They were created in the South so that black students wouldn't be able to go to school with white students after Brown versus Board. That's what vouchers were created for. They were created for a discriminatory purpose. Charter schools are very similar. They are privately controlled, and they allow, many charter schools are able to make decisions about their students after they're enrolled. Now, they'll talk about lotteries this and lotteries that, but charter schools have codes of conduct, and if you don't follow those codes of conduct, then you can be expunged from those schools. And so there's a whole broad, testing is another example. Tests were created in China 1,500 years ago to sort society. Tests came to the United States with the eugenics movement, which some of you are probably very familiar with the eugenics movement. This is a racist movement that says that people based on their race are smarter or less smart or less capable or less able than others just based on their race. The tests were brought here to demonstrate that, the IQ test, etc. They were also used to decide who would go to war to fight and who would be officers. That's the context of tests. Now, since No Child Left Behind came around, tests were turned into this mechanism of civil rights and closing the gaps. But that's not why tests were created, and that's not how tests function. Tests function to sort society. That's what they do. And so they're not a function of civil rights. They're not a function. And one of the really disappointing things about this is that civil rights organizations have taken the civil rights are equal to test. But it has not always been that way. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of the founders of the NAACP, long ago spoke out against testing. And I talked about that in a recent blog. The NAACP sued the state of Florida in the early 1980s when the standardization movement and the testing movement was starting to get rolling. And they sued the state of Florida and said that these tests had a disparate impact on poor students because they were provisioned an education in their schools that was not similar to what upper middle class and wealthy students received. But the courts actually said in that case that the test, quote, eradicate the test eradicate racism. That was the argument that the courts made in 1980. And since that time, folks have continued to make the argument that tests eradicate racism. I don't know about you, but I don't think tests eradicate racism. No. But that is the justification by which we now have tests that evolved from what they were doing in Texas. I worked for Rod Page in the Houston Independent School District in the 1990s in central office. And at that time, those ideas went to Washington with Page and George W. Bush and became No Child Left Behind, based on an idea that Texas had an educational miracle, that we could close the gaps, and that high schools had 0% dropout rates. Of course, nobody's talking about Texas having had an educational miracle 15 years later. We all know that that was Enrontization of the data. And that's why in 2014, all students were not fully proficient, and we didn't have high schools with 0% dropout rates because testing and accountability just doesn't work. In fact, the latest research out of Stanford shows that the NAEP improvement actually slowed down with No Child Left Behind. Not only that, last week it came out that for the first time in 30 years, the NAEP scores did not improve. So if there is no greater indictment of our system, of this testing and accountability system, it's that the NAEP scores slow down. And in fact, not only did the NAEP scores slow down after No Child Left Behind, our improvement has stopped. Now, the people in DC have said, well, that's because we have lots more brown and black kids. Now, to me, that is just an iteration of the eugenics movement. No matter how you slice it, to say that our NAEP scores went down because we have a lot of brown and black kids taking these scores is, in my mind, just plain racist.
That was, yeah. We're all experts, right? By the way, that's Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I'm late.
I should also tell you that you are live on the internet right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I think that's the context of testing. Now, what's interesting about, and I think it's important to talk about vouchers because we're in a state that just said that vouchers is a great idea. But we actually already know what vouchers do. So when you go down to the grocery store, what are the grocery stores here in Las Vegas? Smith's. Okay, so you go down to Smith's, right? This is the local grocery store, and you say, I want a frozen pizza. Now, if you go, now you look at the price in that frozen pizza, it's $10, right? Now, what if you only have $5? Can you legally walk out of that store with a $10 pizza? So in a market, to get something, you have to have capital. Now, in this case, we talked about capital as money, right? And that pizza costs $10. Now, the thing is, it's not mysterious what happens with vouchers. We have many countries around the world that have been using vouchers. There's only one country that has vouchers for every kid, and that's Chile. Now, what you probably don't know is that a dictator decided that he didn't want the government of Chile to be heavily involved with education anymore. He just didn't want public education. He wanted it to be privately provisioned, which is a thread that runs through a lot of the conversations we have today. Pinochet.
No, sorry.
Fujimori would be, I think,
Peru.
And so Pinochet decided that he was going to create this voucher system. Now, 20 years later, what Chile has found is that vouchers actually accentuate segregation, and it also magnifies the inequality between rich and poor, because what happens is that the students that don't have capital become concentrated in just a few schools. But what do I mean by capital? It's not just the kids that don't have the money, because you have a voucher, but the schools there would charge more than the voucher. And so what that's called is an add-on. So you cannot get access to the school. You may have a voucher of, say, $5,000. I'm just making up the number. But if
That's what it is.
but
Just so happens.
in Nevada. But if the tuition is $10,000, what do you have to go to that school? Capital. You have to have a cap. So that's one form of capital. That's financial capital. But there's other forms of capital. What if your parents don't have an automobile and that school's across town? You have to have transportation capital. Okay? What if that school decides that, like a magnet school, you have to have a particular test score to get in? Then you now have to have test score capital. And so there's all these other forms of capital that have to be wielded in a market, because that's how markets function. Markets have winners and losers, and not everybody can walk out of that store with a pizza. And so what vouchers did in Chile over 2 decades is it accentuated the stratification, and it accentuated the segregation, and it made sure that poor kids were segregated into just a few schools at the expense of the entire system. So recently Chile decided in January, after 20 years of this, that they were no longer going to allow, over time, they're going to phase out schools that are for-profit receiving vouchers. So we actually don't have to wait 10 years in Nevada to find, Nevada? Yeah, Nevada. We don't have to wait 10 years in Nevada to find out what vouchers will do. We already know what will happen with vouchers and what it'll do to the public system and who will have access with the voucher and who won't. It's not mysterious, folks. We already know the answer to these questions. There's ideology and there's reality in the data. And so the folks that support vouchers are actually more about ideology, which is that we do not want public provision of education. And we want to control who goes to what school, and the way we do that is by making sure that only the kids that have capital have access to a high-quality education. So that's how vouchers function. We have 2 policy briefs on this that we actually created for Texas policymakers, because guess what? Vouchers comes up every single legislative session. They're relentless. Okay? The money behind vouchers is relentless. The financiers and the industrialists that like that idea, that neoliberal idea of private provision of education, private control of education, the elites controlling education, they're relentless. And so we have a voucher brief that talks about the domestic research on vouchers. We have a voucher brief that talks about the international case studies of vouchers. So we can give that to you all. You can give that to your legislators. You can give that to community folks. And we can make that available to you.
And we're hoping with the ACLU and the other group that we can get the injunction, of course, that we put out there, and that's, I can't remember the date that's supposed to be for, but we're hoping that it doesn't go move forward even to begin with and get initiated. But I have a strong feeling that we're going to have to wait till the next legislative session to try and backpedal.
Yeah, the unfortunate circumstance here is that based on an Ohio case, the U.S. Supreme Court said that it was constitutional in the United States for vouchers to occur. However, it depends on your particular constitution.
Our state constitution says no religious.
Right.
You can't have a religious institution.
So the way they money launder the money then is they have people divert their taxes into what they call savings accounts. And so if that's how I don't know how they do up the legislation here, but that's probably how they did it. Now in some states, the courts have ruled that's just money laundering. In other states, they've allowed it. So it's going to go into the courts, and the decision is going to boil down to, how strong is your constitution, and do the judges view this sort of money laundering scheme, which is the savings accounts and the diversion of tax funds, to be public support of private education? I think it's an important question for us to answer. Should you pay for your neighbor's kids' religious instruction with your tax dollars? I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, I believe every parent should have the choice, if they believe in creation, if they believe in Noah's Ark, if they believe in the Bible, if those things are important to them, I think that they should have the choice to send their kid to a Catholic school or to a Baptist school. But I just don't think that your neighbors should pay for that right. If you make that choice, it's not the government should not be funding a religious decision and religious instruction. The Supreme Court has allowed, for example, the Mormons often have religious instruction across the street from schools, and that's a way that we've gone about this. So there are alternatives to this. So I don't think that your neighbors should pay for the religious instruction of children. I don't think our Constitution allows for it, and it's an ongoing debate.
And we've already seen that in our state, and they're trying to hide it, that it's primarily the well-to-do that are taking advantage of the program, because we all know that, go ahead.
Well, the one guy, I say one thing real quick, because I have somebody that wrote me that's watching it on Periscope, and she says that she can't hear us when we ask him, but
Okay, so
Maybe just repeat the question.
So I'll
she
repeat
said
questions.
if we can be louder, that she can hear Julian.
Okay.
Yeah, watch out when she
I can
asks.
be loud, yes.
So for Periscope folks, I will try to repeat the questions when they come in. Yes, no problem.
Well, what I was going to say was, and I can't remember who it was, but I read it several weeks ago, that one of the creators or something, do you remember what I'm talking about, where he even came out and said, this is not for poor kids, we did not put forth this voucher money for poor kids. They've admitted it.
We've seen this argument in Milwaukee, and we've also seen it in Florida. And what Florida did was it's like a gateway drug, right? Which is, what we'll do is we'll say this is for poor kids. And then what Florida did just recently is said, well, now we're going to open to other folks. Why should only poor kids have access to this, right? And so it's really just a gateway, that argument, because it's not actually about civil rights at all, right? It's not about civil rights. Vouchers were not created for civil rights purposes like we talked about before. Vouchers were created for segregative purposes, and they still serve to segregate schools. We see this in cases around the world, right? And the supporters of vouchers, the neoliberals of the Walton Foundation, the Koch brothers, etc., We know that they've clothed this idea, this neoliberal idea, with civil rights language, but we know what the essential outcomes of these policies are.
And we've got it twofold going in the Clark County School District right now because of a little bit of cart horse, but I'm not sure where it's coming from. But I mean, part of it they say is financial, but it's the cutting back on the busing for the magnet schools.
Right.
So we've already, and I talked to the superintendents and board members about this because, I mean, my kids now are 3.72 miles from our bus stop. I can get them there. I'm fortunate enough, and I take 2 other girls with me. But the reality is that they took away the busing and created it so only if you can get to these few hubs can you have it. The ultimate goal supposedly is that all these schools are going to be magnet schools. Well, what's a magnet? And every school is like that anyway.
Right.
But then we also have these half magnet schools and half neighborhood schools where only the magnet kids are getting the benefit of being in the magnet school.
Sure.
So, you know, we kind of have a whole lot in CCSD that's not necessarily in the state that adds into that has the same purposes, in my opinion.
So you're describing a little bit of the context, and the real issue is that Nevada is one of the bottom 5 states in education funding. And so if you were having a conversation with me and you don't want to talk about what I'm talking about, what you do is you change the subject. And what vouchers does is it changes the subject from the real issue here and in California and in Florida. These are the states that are really proud that they're the bottom of the barrel in spending in public education. They're very happy about that. And so they see charter schools and vouchers as a way to save the state budget. But what they do is they just shift the responsibility of educating kids to the family budget and the budget of parishioners, of the Catholic Church, of the Adventist Church, of the Baptist Church. So they see a savings to their state budget. But what they've done is they've just transferred the responsibility of paying for education to family budgets and to the budgets of parishioners. And so they see this as a savings. They see charter schools as a savings. So, for example, in Texas, charter schools get the average allotment, which is $7,000 or $8,000, whereas some districts like Austin ISD may be spending $13,000 or $14,000. The legislature see that as a savings to their bottom line. But all they've done is transfer the responsibility of educating kids elsewhere. It's an ideological approach to public schooling. It's an ideological approach to prisons. You see the same approach in prisons. We are no longer going to publicly provision prisons. We are going to outsource them to private companies so that we can profit and control and guarantee that we have a ready supply of brown and black folks to go to those prisons.
Well, I don't know, I'm going to put that in a tweet, but it's
Yeah, so she said that she wanted to tweet that, but is thinking about how she would formulate the tweet. So I think Teach for America is another important conversation, and we touched on it just briefly, and there was a conversation before. A teacher in one of the schools here talked about how a Teach for America teacher had his name called over the intercom. And so he went to one of his mentor teachers and said, first of all, where's the office? Because I don't know how to get to the office. Second of all, which I think is quite surprising that a teacher doesn't know where the office is. Second of all, they wanted to draw student grades, and the teacher didn't know how to look at a student's grades. And this is what we're facing, folks. We have a $100 million nonprofit organization who receives money from the Walton Foundation, all sorts of other folks that support this private control of education. And that's really what Teach for America does. A lot of people don't think about this. But what Teach for America does is it's private control of teachers into your community. What they make the decisions on who the teachers are going to be teaching the kids in your community, outside of your community. And not only that, the teachers who they're selecting have no say in that process. And so we know that as he was talking about, the Teach for America teachers come into this turnaround situation. Of course, No Child Left Behind, and then that was first passed by George W. Bush, and then was supported and accentuated by Arne Duncan and Barack Obama, because basically what Barack Obama and Arne Duncan did over the last 7 years was the Republican playbook from the 1990s. I recently wrote about this in the Progressive magazine. They put forth the exact same policies that the Republicans were supporting in the 1990s. If I was a Republican, I'd be flattered that Barack Obama plagiarized my education platform, because that's exactly what Arne Duncan and Barack Obama did. And so this is
it came out.
There's a comment coming from someone on FaceTime. What was the thought?
Chad?
Speak up, Chad.
Well, I'll wait until we get the technical.
Okay. All right, Chet, you're going to have to repeat that. We couldn't hear you.
I said the concept of Teacher America came out of Clinton when he was trying to create a Peace Corps-like system in America, like JFK had created for the world, where people in college would get college paid, money from the government for their college loans to do good for the people of America, such as going to work in impoverished schools and things like that.
Sure. So the comment from the person coming in on FaceTime to the meeting mentioned that that Teacher America is somewhat related to the Peace Corps idea and then Clinton's AmeriCorps idea, which is actually true. A lot of people don't know that some of the federal money that the Teacher America folks receive is AmeriCorps money. What a lot of people don't know too is that if Teacher America teachers threaten to leave, they use those resources as a mallet against those teachers. Not only the AmeriCorps money do they use as a bargaining chip against those teachers if they realize that they don't want to be in Teacher America, but some Teacher America teachers enroll in places like Loyola Marymount, and they go into tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And if they decide to leave Teacher America, then Teacher America and Loyola Marymount come to those Teacher America Corps members and say that that bill is now due. And in fact, more money is due, according to these Teacher America folks that are talking to me about this really big problem. More money is due than they actually agreed to because they've decided to leave Teacher America. So it's actually very difficult for I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's very difficult for Teacher America Corps members to speak out against Teacher America because Teacher America seeks to punish them. They spend tens of thousands of dollars on marketing to discredit any critiques. Instead of taking critiques, embracing them, and thinking about how to reform their reform, instead, Teacher America insists that their policy, that their approach to sending temporary teachers, primarily to teach poor kids, look at all of this research that we paid for, and it all seems to say that we're fantastic. But if you look very carefully at the research that they haven't paid for, what you find out is that Teacher America teachers say they want to leave in droves. Teacher America teachers say that their training has actually gotten worse over time, not better. This is all in the Mathematica study that Teacher for America often says it shows that but Teacher America's effect size in the Mathematica study is about 5 or 6 1/100ths of a standard deviation. So yes, 0.05 is a number for you math teachers, is a number larger than 0, right? 0.05 is larger than 0. But not much larger than 0. In fact, it's minuscule. You need a telescope to see the positive effect that Teacher America teachers have on students. But other reforms, like class size reduction, have effect sizes of 0.22, which is about 400% larger than Teacher America. High quality pre-K, about 0.6, 0.7, depending on what study you look at, which is about 1,000% more effective than Teacher America. So the next time a Teacher America teacher says that they have a positive impact, and the research says that they have a positive impact, you can tell them, yes, it's a positive impact, but you need a telescope to see it. And we should be spending our money on class size reduction. We should be spending our money on high quality pre-K because those reforms are gold standards in the research literature, not research that Teacher America or their supporters have paid for. And so I think that's the context. Yes, Teacher America does have a positive impact, but that positive impact is minuscule, a number that is basically 0.
What study was that?
So to get a wide perspective on Teacher America, I would go to my blog, Cloaking Inequity, click on the Teacher America tag, and there's a lot of research on Teacher America. I've written 2 briefs for the National Education Policy Center. I've reviewed the research studies that they often come out with, and then there's 2 new books from Teacher America alums, and they both have counter-narrative. What counter-narrative means is that you have a narrative being pressed by Teacher America that they're spending tens of thousands of dollars to tell you in the media. Well, Teacher America alums have stepped up to the plate, and they've recently released 2 books, and I'm going to do a review on these very soon. And those have counter-narratives from Teacher America teachers with the things that you as educators already know. because you interact with Teach America teachers on the ground. But that's not the stuff that Teach America wants the media to know. That's the things that you're experiencing with Teacher. And the thing is that Teach America teachers are usually very likable. These are likable people, but they're sinking, they're drowning, and they will tell you that, right? So Teach America teachers, there's two kinds of Teach America teachers, and when you meet one, you can try to understand which they are. They're humble or they have hubris. There's just two kinds, right? The ones that have hubris, they call themselves the Kool-Aid drinkers, right? So these are stories that you are very aware of as educators, right? But now the public is finally getting exposure. Teach America has not been able to clamp down on their alums speaking out against how that organization must reform if they want to be viable.
And actually here,
Is this for me?
yes,
Oh,
lightly.
praise the Lord. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what took so long. Here we
But you guys
watch-
must think I'm fat because this is diet.
I think it's actually supposed to be mine, but it's okay.
Okay.
Well, they give us the room for
He
free,
wants a
so
real
they-
life, though.
if anything else is messed up, we accept it. So here it's been interesting because we see TFA come in and all of a sudden they go up onto the State Board of Education
Right.
and run for election, and how much TFA is actually politically involved in our
Yeah.
state
Right.
is incredible.
That's right.
And with what you were saying about how with putting these new teachers or TFA into schools that are, the most failing schools, right? And that would be a form
Sure.
of discrimination.
Sure.
It's also interesting that you look at these people that have such few history in
Sure.
education, and for some reason they're seen as the experts and thrown into these positions, and it's like,
Of course they are. Yeah. So TFMA has an incredible network. Behind the scenes, they have an email list where they connect all of their folks. Not only do they do that, they have something called LEAD, which I think is Leaders for Educational Equity. And that's also an organization that networks all of these folks to get them into leadership positions. That's why you see Teach America folks after 2 years starting their own charter schools. That's why you see Teach America folks after 2 years becoming principals. That's why you see Teach America folks after 2 years starting the KIP chain. Actually, I think they had 3 years of experience, right? And so Teach America is like, it's a temporary agency that's like instant rice. You just add water, you just add TFA, and magically they become the educational leaders in our society. They go to the school boards, they sign sweetheart deals for Teach America to come in, right? The thing is that Teach America is facing some headway. They're facing some headway. 5-6 years ago, I would get calls from the media.
excuse me,
I'm supposed to get a diet, you're supposed to get a regular?
So about 5 or 6 years ago, I'd get calls from the media, and those calls would say, well, you know what? We've already written this story about Teach for America, and we want like an opposing view to end the last couple of sentences of this article. But now the media is actually taking a very critical look. They're looking at these studies and they're saying, well, this study says this, Teach for America. Why did you spin it this way? You can see pieces in The Nation. You can see pieces in the Harvard Crimson. The media is now taking a very critical look. And now the youngsters, because Teach for America is an engine, right? For example, the KIP schools probably could not exist without Teach for America because of the high burnout rate of the teachers at their schools. And so what you see is 40, 50% at some KIP schools are 1 to 2 year early teachers. You become a lead teacher in some KIP schools at year 3, right? Because they have such high turnover rates. And so 1/3 of all Teach for America teachers, according to their data, are teaching in charter schools. And so what happens is that Teach for America is the engine of this choice reform movement. This movement could not function without the warm bodies that Teach for America provides them. Now they will deny this. They will say, no, no, no. We are about educational equity, and their most recent thing is look at all the brown and black teachers that we're recruiting to Teach for America. And if you look at the entire population of teachers, here's an apple. I don't know if you've seen this meme. They put 2 apples and they said, look, Teach for America teachers are much more diverse than teachers in the United States. But what they didn't say is, what do Teach for America teachers look like compared to Title I school teachers, which is where these teachers are teaching? They didn't say, what do they look like compared to other new teachers, which are much more diverse populations than the entire nation? So actually, their meme that had an apple and an apple should have had an orange and an apple, because Teach for America does that a lot. With the sleight of hand, they show their data. And in fact, I always tell Teach for America, it's like that movie Free Willy. They need to free their data. because Teach America talks about all the data they have, but they don't make it publicly available. And so they just sit around, making memes, creating reports, et cetera, but they don't make their data available to researchers to reanalyze, which to me tells me something.
Just curious, what does TFA require people to have going in? And is it 5 weeks of training they get? I just want.
So they don't actually. So they receive 5 weeks of training, but they really only receive 15 to 18 hours in the classroom before they hit the classroom. Right. So you see places like Texas where 60% of all new teachers are alternatively certified teachers. These are teachers that could have as little as 30 hours of online training before they hit the classroom. So the thing is that we're always talking about teacher quality, right? But what they've done is they've created this back door, right, of alternative certification. Teach America is one of them. And so, but the thing is what we're really talking about is a backdoor only to teach poor kids. It's not a backdoor to the wealthy areas in Las Vegas or the wealthy areas in Houston or the wealthy. The wealthy would never allow a Teach America teacher to teach their kid. They know better. They know that they want a certified, experienced teacher to teach their kids, and that they're not going to allow a Teach America teacher to teach special ed in their school. They're not going to allow a teacher ed to teach ESL or ELLs in their school. That is, the wealthy are not going to allow that. So what we're really talking about is teacher quality for poor kids, that Teach America is only for poor kids. And so to me that tells me something, because my mom always tells me what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? And what that tells you is that the wealthy know better. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of studies that Teach America and their allies pay for. We know what's really going on because the wealthy would never allow that. In fact, we often talk about Finland, right? You're probably tired of hearing about Finland. And, they talk about all the great things about Finland. I had a chance to talk with Pasi Sahlberg a few weeks ago. And one of the things that Pasi Sahlberg mentioned to me, I didn't even bring it up, was Teach for America. And I can't really, I don't want to say on the record what Pasi Sahlberg told me about Teach for America, but if you see me in private, and after we turn off the internet, I'll tell you what Pasi Sahlberg told me about Teach for America, and Teach for America specifically at Harvard, where he's teaching right now. So, but you don't actually have to go to Finland to see what works in education. You just have to go across the tracks. You just have to go across the highway. You just have to go to the west side of town or the east side of the town. Where the wealthy live, you see everything that Finland is doing for their education system, you see the wealthy doing for their kids. The wealthy throw money at the education of their kids. But when we talk about, we shouldn't throw money at education, what we're talking about is we shouldn't throw money at the education of poor kids or lower middle class kids or middle class kids. That's what the legislators actually mean when they say we shouldn't throw money in education. Because we know that the wealthy are sending their kids to Montessori. When they're 3 and 4 and 5, they are spending $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 for high quality early education, right? That's what the wealthy do. That's why you see the disparities in per spending on pupils between school districts, because the wealthy throw money at education because they know that good teachers actually cost money. They know that beautiful football fields, those cost money, and that attracts families. They know that education, a properly provisioned education, costs money. So what we're really talking about is how do we ration a high-quality education for poor kids and middle-class kids? That's what the legislators are really talking about when they say don't throw money in education.
That's interesting, because Finland has even said that their ideas for education, many of them actually came from the United States. They just took the best practices and then helped create their own system that worked for their population.
That's right. Yeah, so what you just said was that Finland often looks at U.S. research. And that's what's interesting, right? Which is that in the United States, you think about researchers and you think about people who are out of touch with reality. That's the common framing of the ivory tower of what we do, right? But I recently heard from someone at a civil rights organization. He asked Singapore, similar sort of question. What can you attribute the rise of Singapore over the last few decades in educational rankings, right? And what he said was, well, the United States and the universities, they do lots of research, and so we took the best of that research and applied it here in Singapore. You hear the same thing in Korea, right? Which is that what's really driving educational policy in our country is not research or data, it's ideology. And it's ideology that education should be privately controlled by the elites, by just a few people. that it shouldn't be democratically controlled. That's the ideology that's driving vouchers. That's the ideology that's driving charters. That's the ideology that's driving Teach America. You can just put any of the policies that are hot and sexy right now in the legislature here, in the legislature in Texas, in the legislature in Florida, and they can all be explained by the common denominator of privately controlled, anti-democratic, opportunity for privatization, and only just a few people control those policies. Whether it be Teach America deciding what teachers come to your community, whether it be a charter school deciding how the money of that school is going to be spent, etc., etc. They all have those common denominators.
We have a question from somebody that's
A question coming in?
watching in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know how to ask it necessarily, but it is from a special ed teacher, but they want to know about TFA's Special Education and Ability Initiative.
Well, so we're talking about shortages. Now, this state has severe shortages. I mean, they closed down the educator preparation and the leadership preparation at UNLV. They thought, oh, we could just recruit all the teachers from Phoenix, right? It doesn't work that way, folks. You know, bureaucrats and policymakers think the colleges of education are the reason why education is falling apart. It turns out this back door that we talked about is why the education is falling apart. Because our approach to educator and leader quality in our country is, let's take a plate of spaghetti, throw it against the ceiling, and see what sticks. Whereas Finland, Singapore, and all the other countries realize we need a national teacher strategy and a national leader strategy to be successful. So everything that we're doing here is the antithesis of what the most successful countries in the world do. And so on special education, what Teach America has done is they've realized that there is a huge gap in a huge shortage in the number of educators. The thing is that the law, IDEA, and other laws protects these kids. And to me, I think that, and there's some things that, one of the most difficult things about my life currently is that there are things that I know that I can't say, right? And there are people that are very aware of Teach America's interest in special education. I have been talking with TFA special education teachers, and they tell me they had 1 day of training on special education before they entered the classroom. A single day. Now, to me, that has to be a violation of the law and the protections that we've afforded special education students. And I suspect that Teach America will probably be hearing about this in a lawsuit very soon. I suspect that.
Somebody asked me, the Periscope watcher wants to know what Lucy Flores thinks, because you know you're good friends with Lucy.
About
And that's,
TFA.
is it TFA specific?
Well, I can't speak for Lucy Flores and her education agenda. What I can say is that I trust Lucy Flores. I trust her. She grew up in this community. She went to the schools in this community. She understands the plight and the challenges of Latinos and other folks in this city. And I think that her education agenda will be the right education agenda in the Congress. I think her education agenda will be the right educational agenda for the state and for the city. Now, I am not endorsing her on behalf of any of the organizations that I'm affiliated with, but I think Lucy Flores would be the right person for the job. But you'll have to ask Lucy Flores specifically about her education platform, because I am not authorized to speak on that.
And that was my question, because I didn't even know what they were asking about specifically.
But that's a great question.
She was asked if she wanted to join us today, but she happens to be in DC.
Yes.
So it was a schedule conflict.
Yes. Unfortunately, Lucy Flores could not be here today. She had some responsibilities out of town.
And with all the work that I've done in the legislature, I know that she had voted against funding TFA
Yes.
on the state level.
I think Lucy Flores, as you all are very well, has been a good friend of public education.
Yes.
I think that she has stood with educators on almost every issue, 99.9% of issues. So I hope, my personal hope, is that educators will get behind her, because she's not going to let you down.
Perfect. Did you have any other questions on the video?
I have a question.
Okay, there's a question.
Going back to the voucher argument, one of the main proponents that they are pushing in Nevada is the fact that under the free enterprise market, all those situations that you mentioned earlier will be made null and void, because schools will be built in those communities, because students of color, to serve students, they don't have to make that travel. So how do you argue, or what kind of research might you have to combat that perspective?
Well, first of all, Nevada is one of the worst spending states in education there is. So Nevada hasn't even tried fully funding education. They're nowhere near it. If you look at the states that spend the most, because we often talk about this, if you look at a place like Massachusetts, it turns out that those states, which have impoverished communities like Dorchester and other places, they perform very well on international assessments. If you look at math and science, a lot of the states that have high spending levels perform very well in the TIMSS NAEPS comparisons, right? States like Nevada and others that are low spending states, they perform very poorly relative to the rest of the world. But that being said, if you look at these comparisons, you can see that our overall education system is not in crisis in the United States. We do even a place like Texas, which is a middling performing state in math and science. They actually score 7th, just above Finland in math. So you can see that our national system of public education actually isn't in crisis. The crisis is actually in poor communities. And that's of the making of policymakers, because they haven't given parents the very things that they want. If you ask parents what they want in a school, there's been lots of polls on this. One recently from In the Public Interest. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm redefining what school choice looks like. So parents want more parental involvement. They want less testing. They want high quality teachers. They want more extracurriculars. These are the top priorities of parents, but each of these priorities actually cost money. And so the thing is that the reason why families and communities are unhappy with the schools that they have right now is because policymakers haven't provided the resources for schools to give parents the things that they actually want. So we already know, like if you look at vouchers and charters, they're like 8th and 9th, and they're way down the list in terms of the things that parents want to be able to choose. This is a case of policymakers trying to convince you what you need, because they've decided, for the reasons that we've talked about, which is that they see vouchers as a savings. You see, this is ideology in search of a solution. And so we know what works. It's not mysterious what works in education. We've also talked about that. And so this is a case of changing the subject. So we're going to actually provide you schools in your neighborhood. The market will provision those schools because we as policymakers have failed at our job to provision those schools. That seems like an asinine argument. I failed at what I was supposed to do as a policymaker, so therefore I need the market to fix it because I'm a terrible legislator. I'm a terrible legislature. I'm a governor that cannot provision schools in communities, so therefore I need the market to do it.
So you got to flip the script on that one.
Exactly.
We needed that before
Control the
last
narrative.
election.
Well, unfortunately, because of the off election, we know how that functions in.
And we know who stays home.
Right. So
And teachers, sadly, are one of those big groups.
I suspect you will see in this next election a huge Democratic wave in Nevada because Hillary's going to invest in the state. The Democrats are going to invest in this state, and the Republicans are going to suffer for it. And that'll provide you the opportunity to provide a positive agenda. So we've talked about a lot of the common denominators of the policies that you see right now in Nevada, in Florida, and Texas, many places. We talked about the common denominators of those policies are that they focus on private control and or privatization, that they focus on just a few people controlling those policies, and that they're top down. Those are the primary mechanisms. But there's alternatives. There are community-based democratic alternatives to every single policy that they talk about. So for example, charter schools. We actually don't need corporate for-profit charter schools. We can do community-based charters. There are examples, for example, in Austin. One example is Travis Heights, where the teacher association, the faith community, the teachers in that school, and the students and the neighborhood all got together to do a community-based charter school, a charter school that was attached to that community and not run by a corporate franchise from out of town.
Why can't we just do that in our public education system? Why does it have to go through a charter?
Well, I think this is a great question. I think that you can do it. There are in-district charters, which there are in-district magnets. I think it's just a case of framing, right? I think you are right on the money. But when people say charter, they think that charters are all the same. But we know that automobiles are all very different, right? And so we use that word charter just like we use the word automobile, but they're all very different. But what people have to understand is that community-based run schools or in-district charters are very different than these charters like basis charters, which have a for-profit arm, have a non-profit arm, then they run the business of the school through the for-profit arm, and they also have selective admissions, and they also get rid of kids so that their senior year looks 2/3 or 1/3 or 1/4 of the freshman year because they're using selective policies over time, right? And so that is not in the best interest that's not how public schools function. Of course, we know public schools have troubles in the 9th and 10th grades, but in looking at charter schools in Texas, we found that charter attrition would double and triple the rate of traditional public schools. So yeah, because that's the first thing Teacher America will say. That's the first thing charters will say. Oh, well, you're saying that you're in favor of the current system. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm a reformer. I'm a community-based reformer. I'm not a top-down private control reformer. So with assessment, there's teacher assessment. I heard you talking about value-added modeling beforehand. There's student assessment. What No Child Left Behind did is it privatized assessment. What No Child Left Behind privatized assessment by putting the assessment of children to go grade to grade, the assessment of schools, it put it in the hands of Pearson. It put it in the hands of other testing and took it out of the hands of communities and local communities. So there are alternatives to privatized assessment. In New York, for example, they've scored the Regents exam on the local level for a long time, decades. There's other examples of locally controlled assessment of students. So assessment does not have to be privatized. It does not have to be top-down. It does not have to be controlled by corporations. Teacher value-added models. One of the really interesting approaches that teacher associations have been involved with is the consultant teachers, the mentor teachers, and peer assistance and review. And that's a locally driven, where expert teachers actually do the assessing, instead of a number cruncher like me sitting in an office telling you that this year you're great, oh, next year you're terrible, oh, this next year you're great. Due to the instabilities of those statistical models, almost every statistician that are researchers in the field have said that value-added models are being misused. But politicians don't agree with the people who actually know how to do them. But ask a politician to specify a value-added model for you, and they won't be able to do it. But the people who can actually specify, what I mean by specify a value-added model, is sit down and write out the statistical model. Politicians can't do that, but they believe wholeheartedly that they're valuable. But the people who can actually write the models, specify the statistical models, and can tell you the weaknesses of the model will tell you that they're being used improperly. But policymakers will tell you exactly the opposite. So we need expert teachers, evaluating teachers, externally to the school sites, like we see with peer assistance and review. There's many other examples of how we do community-based democratic reform. So don't let people tell you that you're not reformers, because you are reformers. But you're community-based, democratically controlled reformers. You are not top-down, private controlled reformers. Sure, so I was asked to repeat it. So we are education reformers, but we believe in democratically controlled schools. We believe in community-based reforms. We do not believe in top-down, privately controlled reforms that seek profit and privatization on behalf of just a few elites.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where does the data mining and tracking of student data come in with all of this stuff?
So tell me more what you mean by data mining.
Where we have all of our kids are tracked from pre-K the minute they enter a school.
Sure.
They're tracked from pre-K all the way up.
Yeah, so you're talking about, so this actually goes into the earlier comments that I talked about, the real role of testing. The real role of testing is to track and sort kids. It's not to close achievement gaps. Because as you know, how valuable is the state assessment for your instruction on a daily basis? Exactly. It's like when I flew in here to Las Vegas, I looked down at the ground and I could see that there was casinos, but I couldn't really make out the details because these exams are from 10,000 feet. They may be valuable at the end of the year, they may be valuable at the beginning of the year, but you hear all this conversation about data-based classrooms. It's total bullshit because you know that the exams are not valuable enough. They're not as valuable as your spelling tests on Friday. They're not as valuable as your semester examinations. See, the thing is that when we were children, we were not subjected to this privatized assessment scheme that's going on right now, that has been under this sort of civil rights umbrella. our teachers use a variety of assessments to understand whether we are ready to go to the next grade, right? And so that's the key piece here, is that the tests have their place in a very limited way. But when we get into the tracking and sorting, that's where they become problematic for poor kids, right? So the issue is, how do we do this differently? How do we do this differently for students? How do we do this differently for schools? How do we do this differently for districts and for states? And the idea is dashboards, multiple measure dashboards. And so when you're in your car, right, the speedometer tells you one thing about your car, right? What does it tell you? How fast you're going. What if you had 60 speedometers in your car? How fast would they tell you your car was going? 60. That's our paradigm right now. Our paradigm right now is we have 60 speedometers, a bunch of tests. They all tell us the same thing, but they don't really tell us anything valuable. Okay? So what you do is we have a dashboard of information. You have something that tells you the temperature of your car. You have something that tells you the oil pressure, the tire pressure. And all these different metrics tell you the function of your car and how your car is functioning, besides just the speed. And so what we need is multiple measure approaches to assessing students. Okay? There's portfolio, there's qualitative, there's quantitative data. That's how you really know. Any statistician will tell you, the more information you have, the more sure you are. We need multiple measure approaches to data for schools. So for example, how many kids in your school went to county lockup? One teacher just said she doesn't know. But do you think that it's important for you to know how many of your kids are going to jail?
Definitely.
So this is the kind of information that we want the public to have because it's valuable to them. How many of your kids went to higher education last year? Community college, four-year college? And so that's the kind of information we want to know. Well, because you know what will happen? If we know that only 7 kids went to higher education from our school, 20 went to community college, but then you see across town that they had 70 kids go, first of all, you're going to ask yourself, why the disparity? The second thing you're going to ask yourself is, what do we need to do to make sure that more of our kids go into higher education? You see, when you are measured on other things besides the tests, it allows you to focus the technical things that you do in your school on other things. What if you found out that of your 10 kids that went to higher education last year, none of them failed out after their first year? What would you then in your leadership teams do to reassess what you were doing? You would say to yourself, what do our kids need to know how to do to be successful after their first year of college? Instead of saying, what do our kids need to do to be successful on the state level exam? Because we believe that the state level exam is a proxy for success in society. Uh-oh, could you fix that for me? We believe that stop banging the table. We believe that the state level test is a proxy for the things we care about. But you know what? It actually isn't. Why don't we actually measure and consider the things that we care about as a society so that schools can focus on those things instead of the exam? I know it's revolutionary to actually collect data on the stuff we care about instead of something we don't care about, but that's what we need to do. We need a multiple measure dashboard of the information that we as communities care about so that our schools can focus on that information and improving that baseline information. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a test and punish. It doesn't have to be carrot and punish. In most countries, accountability information systems are just about that. They're about information. For example, my school in Australia provides information to communities so that they have a dashboard of what's happening in their school. So we don't necessarily have to hold the district accountable for how many kids are going to county lockup. But we want the district and people in schools to be aware of those things so that they can address it. How about we give schools and communities information that's valuable instead of test scores that occur at 10,000 feet? Yes, sir.
My nephew scored the second highest school district on the testing. They gave him everything.
Sure they did.
So I asked him, I said, well, how many kids are like this in the district? 2.5%.
Right. Right. So the comment was that his nephew received the second highest score in the district, and he received a lot of accolades and scholarships and other opportunities, right? And so that's exactly what's going on here. It's a sort and test society, and let's just be honest. The reason why we're all sitting around this table is because we did well on a test, or multiple tests. The reason why I went to graduate school is I had to pass several tests to get there. I had to pass the test in my high school. I had to pass the test in my university. I had to do well on the GRE. That's the only way I gained access to Stanford University. And part of the challenge is that the people who are controlling these decisions in our society have bias. They have bias because they received those positions in society because they did well in exams. And so therefore, why not perpetuate the system that put me into this position of power and influence?
Or they didn't and dropped out, and maybe that's part of the problem.
Or that.
You want to laugh? My mentor was schooled in international schools because his dad was in the military.
Okay.
He spent 6 months in the school district and got that.
Oh, wow.
So compare where the education came from.
So he said that his nephew was schooled internationally, and he spent 6 months in the school district and did really well. And so essentially, making the putting the idea out there that his international schooling was better than the schooling that occurred here in the U.S., which is very true. Other thoughts or questions or comments?
I thought, Mike, didn't you have a question?
Oh, what was it? I'd like to address it.
No, you were talking about Hillary Clinton and how that's going to bring about this wave of Democratic votes and I guess my question is, and it's not necessarily directed just at her, but
Yeah.
since CFA was a Clinton program, and I'm not sure if it was designed at first to become what it has today,
Sure.
and you send her to the White House, and I don't see where that brings about a change in the direction of education and how we keep from getting another Arnie Duncan or perpetuate TFA to a greater extent, or where that changes direction.
That's a great question. So the question really, I think, if I could boil it down, and if I get this wrong, you tell me. I think the question is, will Hillary Clinton give us another Arnie Duncan? I think that's the meta question, right?
And the answer is yes.
Well, I hope the answer is no. One person said that he thinks the answer is yes. I hope the answer is no. I don't know the answer to that question. I honestly don't. I mean, I am aware of some conversations that are going on with the Hillary Clinton campaign, but I hope the answer is no. I think the real challenge is that we, and part of this is on us, because we as educators, I'm an educator myself, we have not done a good job to articulate a vision. You can't find, there's an old adage in politics, you can't fight something with nothing. So for a very long time, we've been saying, no, we don't like vouchers, no, we don't like charters, no, we don't like testing, no, we don't like Teacher America, no, this is the conversation we've been having. But we haven't come to the table with alternatives to those approaches, right? And so for the first time, I think we're starting to see some progress. So for example, California now has what is called local accountability. This is that multiple measures stuff and that we were talking about. But what districts are required to do is they create long-term and short-term plans in conjunction with the community. I know, this is insane that districts would actually put together strategic plans in conjunction with parents and other community groups. In some places like LA, we're talking about $1 billion. This strategic plan covers $1 billion of spending. Now, it was rough in the early going because for the last 20 years, we've had all top-down policy. So the communities are like, whoa, we have a seat at the table. How are we going to do? Some districts have seen this as an inconvenience and not really done it in a way that is efficacious. But here's the point of the conversation, which is that we now have an alternative agenda. If you say to me, I like KIPP charter schools, I say to you, I think we need community-based charter schools that are not franchised externally, and not run by Teacher America teachers that have only been there 2 years, but that are community-based collaborations of different stakeholders. You tell me, I like high-stakes testing. Well, for a long time we just said we don't like. No, we believe in community-based assessment. We believe in multiple measures assessment with qualitative and quantitative data. You tell me that I think we should have more accountability because if we don't, then the civil rights of these kids will be violated. Well, we need multiple measures, local level accountability. That's the alternative to top-down accountability. So an old adage in politics is that you can't fight something with nothing. And so the point that I'm making is that we are expressing to the Bernie campaign, to the Hillary campaign, and any Republican will listen, because believe it or not, the Republican...
Everybody forgets O'Malley.
O'Malley? Believe it or not, Republicans are listening to this too, because Republicans are interested in locally controlled policy.
Right.
They're interested and having local communities involved in these conversations. And the stuff that the Democrats and the Republicans have been pushing for a long time is all top down. And so, you know, in a few weeks, I'm going to be giving, in December, I'm going to be giving, December the 1st, I'm giving a lecture for the Council of State Governments West. And we're going to talk all about community-based reforms as alternatives to these top-down reforms. Because not only Democrats are listening, Republicans are listening too. Republican school boards are listening because they're tired of the test and punish system that hasn't served their district well. And so it's not only Democrats, but I think Republicans are listening. Now, will Hillary listen to a community-based, democratically controlled agenda? I hope so. I don't know the answer to that. I think over the next few months, we'll find that out. But I think that we now have an agenda that is an alternative. You cannot fight something with nothing. But we now have an agenda. We have an alternative for every single one of the top-down control policies.
I think part of that issue too is the Democrats who do support education in general more are so tied up in Common Core, which is that top-down system, and many of us who might speak out against Common Core are instantly labeled as against Democrats or Republicans or Tea Party, but that is something that actually can reach across the aisle. There are different reasons for why we want it, but I think that is part of the focus, and I do think that Democrats in general do not have the education they need to have, and so that's where that voice needs to come out stronger, I think.
And I think part of the challenge in D.C. is, I don't know if you know this or not, but Teacher America pays for their staffers to be the education staffers for people on the House and Senate education committees. So if you wonder why the same ideas are recycled and are coming out of D.C., it's because Teacher America are pressing these very same ideas that we're talking about, and they have a billionaire paying the salaries of the Teacher America people to serve as the education advisors in D.C. This is documented. Now, they don't want me to talk about this. And they want to say, oh, no. We're all about social justice and Black Lives Matter, etc. But Teacher America has aligned themselves with the neoliberal devil. That's the bottom line on Teacher America. Whether they acknowledge it or not, that's their issue. Now, I hope that Teacher America turns the corner and decides to divorce themselves from these neoliberal top-down privatization controls of schools. Now, specifically, your question was about Common Core. Now, my best friend is an ESL teacher in the Bay Area. He likes Common Core.
English teachers in general do.
But here's the piece. Is that the Common Core, and I wrote about this on my blog, was written by the testing companies for the tests.
Yes.
So standards by themselves are not evil. In fact, I'm a teacher. I like it when, although I'm not teaching this year, when I receive extra materials or I get syllabi from other folks or I get good ideas or books, I like to integrate that into the classroom, right? Now, the thing is that that's not the issue. Common Core by itself is not evil. The problem with Common Core is that they're tied to SBAC and all these other tests for the same tracking and sorting reasons that they always have. So it's a different game with a new name. It's the same stuff. So if the Common Core could be divorced from the test, but the testing companies will never allow that. They are wedded together. But if the Common Core could be divorced from these tests that are used to sort and track poor kids, then I think all of the opposition to Common Core will mostly dissipate. The Common Core stayed away from the hot topics of science and social studies, right? They went with like capabilities, or there's another word that they use, literacy or something like that, right?
Except, I was just going to say, except in the elementary schools, 2/3 of it's developmentally inappropriate.
Right.
Well, okay, there's that issue, which is...
no teachers were
Well, for me, as a math teacher, I had a scripted test. Would they be so interested in that scripted test if they weren't making text, if they weren't making so much money off of testing? I
Yes.
can't say because that would be down the road, but it really kills my classroom. There's no creativity, no
Yeah, this is an important critique that my best friend is made too, which is that some of the Common Core is development inappropriate, right? And in a further critique is that the tests tied to the Common Core lack validity. So the psychometricians that I know, especially Roxana Marachi at San Jose State, has looked at this very carefully, and these tests have huge error bands, like huge, because they are probably not valid tests, right? And so these are some very important considerations, I think. But if Common Core was optional and you thought that it was development inappropriate, then you could decide not to use it. But since it's tied to the exams, you are roped in, lassoed into this whole paradigm that the Gates Foundation and others have placed in front of teachers forced in front of teachers. Now, what's interesting is the Gates Foundation is taking a new strategy. Their new strategy is for teachers to tell everybody how much they love the Common Core, and they're spending millions of dollars to have teachers do that. They had Cal State, which I'm part of that system, hold a concurrent, and they paid Cal State millions of dollars to do this, hold a concurrent cheerleading session at every Cal State campus so that teachers could tell the world how much they love how much they love.
Put that out. When I got that in any class, I was like,
Sorry, how much they love Common Core. Now, I think the bottom line is this. Let me just loop back, which is that if the Common Core became optional, I think that the opposition to Common Core would melt away. However, we know that's not going to be the case because they were made for these tests and they were made for tracking and sorting kids, just like every exam that came before them.
But at the same time, teachers are really good at this, and that's kind of one of my things with Common Core I'll say, is that it's so specific and there's so many levels of it, whereas if you had a basic framework and let us fill all that in, that's what really works, and that's what works at the school level.
Yes.
We all have the same goals where we want to get to at the end. How we get there is then up to us in our classrooms. And so to me, that's really the way to get it there, is to have these overriding ideas. And again, it's not mandatory, but here's a guideline. This is about where they should be. Then if this kid goes from this state to this state, they're going to be pretty much in the same place, you know, as these other students.
So, you know, and that's what we should be able to do. If Common Core is optional, then we could trust teachers to scaffold that as appropriate in the classroom, right?
trust a teacher?
You mean,
You know what that idea?
wait a minute.
I know, trust teachers.
Got the wrong district. Sorry.
Wrong country.
Yeah.
How long is it gonna take before it collapses in?
Collapses in? Well, so, you know, Jitu Brown, who's a community organizer in Chicago, is a great guy. He was part of the hunger strike for the community-based school. He said this is sabotage. Actually, what they're doing to the system is creating it so that it will implode, so that they can rescue the day with vouchers and private schools, right?
Yep.
So what we have, so we need a system. Like we talked about before, we already know what works. So what we don't know how to do is education on the cheap. And so they're constantly tinkering with their educational policies because they're trying to figure out how do we provision education on the cheap. We already know how to do education expensively and for it to work. There's no mystery to that part. What they're always tinkering with is how do we do education cheap for poor kids. So I actually, you know, sadly, I think that the states that are going down this road of privatization, they're going to be in a world of hurt. We already know how these voucher schemes look in Chile and other places. And what will happen is 5, 6, 7 years down the road, we're going to say, oh, it was a mistake. Or, oh, we just didn't have enough tests. Or we just didn't have enough vouchers, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have enough of the Common Core. We needed 7 tests instead of 2. But we know that these policies will fail. It's very clear as you look across countries that these types of policies fail. If you want to look at the successful countries or the successful states, you want to look at Massachusetts, you want to look at Finland, you want to look at Singapore. Those are the models of how to empower teachers, how to attract the highest quality teachers in the profession, how to keep them there. That's a really serious issue. 50% of teachers, and this is a number that we debate a lot amongst researchers, that number varies from 30 to 50. We have to keep teachers once we get them there. For example, you were talking about the TFA teachers that you bring in and you train. You spend all of this time mentoring TFA teachers and they leave 2 years later. I think about when I was in the Houston Independent School District. There was a training that I wanted to do. It was a technology training, I think a database training. But my superintendent knew that I was leaving for Stanford for graduate school. And she said to me, why would I spend all these resources and money, this, I don't know, $2,000, to train you on database? I know it'll be good for you for your career long term, but for the district it doesn't make sense because I know you're leaving. And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Does it make sense to invest all this money in Teach America teachers? Their finder's fee can be $1,000, it could be $5,000 depending on your contract. Not only are there pecuniary costs, which are the financial costs of Teach America, we have to think about the cost of this teacher training Teach for America teachers and spending a lot of his time when he could be spending his time on traditionally trained teachers that are going to stick around, where Teach America teachers live at 60 to 80% in 3 to 4 years, right? So we also have to think about the cost of teacher time, the pecuniary and the non-pecuniary cost of these policies. There are costs to these policies in the long term and the short term that are problematic, and we have to express to our policymakers that these are terrible ideas. Why not do the things that we know work? Why not invest in the gold standards? Why not provide every single kid in Nevada high-quality pre-K education? That is the biggest reform, that has the biggest impact. But you know what? High-quality pre-K education actually costs money. And we don't want to throw money in education. So why would we spend money on a reform that we know works relative to reforms that we don't know work?
You keep talking about Massachusetts. You know the biggest influx of people in Massachusetts was Finns. Pittsburgh, Grafton, all those small communities were the influx of Finns when they came to America.
Sure.
So when you talk about the education system, where do you think they got it from?
Yeah. That's a good point. So the point that he made was that Massachusetts had a huge influx of Finnish immigrants who believed in a corporatized democratic approach to education.
So, because I wanted to wrap it up so we can get on to our other business that we have to do too, but a couple of things localized here. One is, do you have an alternative to bring in teachers specifically with such a needy area like Las Vegas, because we're just so short and we cannot compete with California wages?
Sure. So the first thing is you have to hold UNLV accountable. You have to say to UNLV, you need to train teachers and you need to train leaders, and they need to be ready to hit the classroom on day one. That's the first thing, that's the first place you need to start. And we need to provide the working conditions, the pay, and the leadership quality, and all the other things that we know from the research literature that cause teachers to stay. You have to hold your district accountable to provide those things in schools.
And those are all the things that are lacking in the Clark County School
Right.
District.
You can put your whole fingers.
Union leadership accountable to make sure they hold the district accountable.
Sure. So all of these other things, you know, I could suggest a set of Band-Aid approaches, right? There's, you know, but there has to be structural approaches. This is a pipeline. You have, and the other thing is students, because most teachers come from the community that they live in. Most teachers do, and so and part of the challenge with Teacher America is you bring in folks that are coming from all over the United States, and they're going to scatter to the wind when they're done. And so you want to make sure that you have students from your district, from Clark County, going to UNLV or going to Arizona State and coming back because they're vested in this community. They understand this community, right? And so
UNLV has lost its pipeline. I'll give you an example. How many people came here years ago and got degrees out of state? And when you got here, you had to go in UNLV to take classes to maintain your license. That's one of them. A lot of that pipeline's dried up.
That's right.
The problem that the UNLV has is they don't see where they get, how can I say, to be able to draw them in, it's all about money. UNLV's stuck with the fact that pipeline's cut off. And now when the district is talking about doing away with the master's program, which is now we're going to do equals to a master's instead of a license for master's degree, UNLV is out of the picture. So all that stuff has happened in UNLV. Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. But what I'm saying to you is they need to change and get UNLV to change what's happening.
Well, how ridiculous it is, sorry, with the CTE, that we get a great deal with them at Southern Utah University, where you can get the 18 credit graduate for $3,600, that we didn't create that with UNLV. It makes zero sense. It's like we shot ourselves in the foot, and our union did that. That was not the district.
Right. So
when they create that,
and Torah.
So you just,
it's both sides.
So you have to think about community solutions that set up your the Clark County for the long term. There's no Band-Aid solutions here, and you've got to think about how do we work in the best interest of this community by creating the collaborations that maybe haven't existed before, by creating the relationships that haven't existed before, right? When at Cal State, now that there's a shortage, the phone in the teacher credentialing area is ringing off the hook, right? But the solutions from some of the districts is, oh, we're going to start up our own programs to solve this issue, right? But that is not a long-term solution because districts tried that before when there was a boom or bust, right? And so those partnerships have to exist. They have to thrive over time, and you have to create a community approach to this problem. It can't just be an issue when it flares up every couple of years, right? As the economy goes up and down, you have to have solutions that are sustainable for the long term.
And competitive with others.
That's correct.
So, I guess my question, you've given us so much information and so much to think about. It's
Sure.
like my brain is going to explode.
Sure.
I want to know, is there anything, and if so, what can those of us sitting around this table whose hearts are in this, what can we do? What can we walk out of this room and do?
So one thing is create yourself a social media ecology. Make sure that you stay in touch on the Nevada Bats page. Make sure you stay in touch with folks. Consume information and send that information out. Because before we, you know how it is. The newspapers are controlled by the editorial people. The television stations are also controlled by the elites, right? But now that we have social media, we can communicate with each other and do things and nobody can stop us. There's no longer any gatekeepers. We can get information to parents, to communities. We can share that across the nation and the world. When I started writing my blog, I was writing it about US-based things. People from 192 countries have read my blog. Nearly 750,000 people have read the blog. And it's not something I do every day. But between my Twitter, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, you spread the information. The gatekeepers can't stop us. So make sure you consume and spread information online so that people will be aware. Don't just think of your social media as like, here are pictures of what I had for dinner. Think of your social media as an advocacy forum in addition to what you had for dinner. Okay? Be advocates online and think about how you create an ecology of information to get that information across. The second thing is make sure you communicate and develop relationships with policymakers, because policymakers listen to people who give them money, people who they have relationships with, and people that are introduced to them through various associations, right? So make sure you develop relationships. We're never going to win on the money side, right? The casino guys, Allison, all those people, they're always going to have more money than us, but they will never have more people power than us. When you know that when they have to convince people, when they have to pay people to come to rallies and give them T-shirts like we were talking about, you know their message is weak, right? And so it's with people power via social media that we can defeat these folks. Also, make sure that you read the popular blogs. Of course, read Cloaking Inequity. We will give you all the ammunition you need to defeat every talking point that's out there. And if there isn't, and if there's a talking point that comes up, I will write a special blog post. Oftentimes, people don't know this. I write blog posts for specific people, and it's for specific reasons. So if there's a talking point that you come across, you send me that talking point, I will write a blog post specifically for that talking point, and I won't say that you necessarily sent me that talking point, but I will address it, okay? I will address it with data, I will address it with research, I will address it with examples from different communities. And so just be sure that you are informed and aware of these different things. I will give you the voucher briefs. Also, Santa Ana, when they were fighting Teacher America, one of the teachers there came up with the principles, the Santa Ana Principles for Teacher America. One of those principles was that a certain percentage of the Teacher America core members had to be from that community so that they would stay. And so there's a set of principles that a Santa Ana teacher came up with that you can get into the Teacher America contract as a reform to Teacher America, right? So that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. There's often information out there. If you send me an email about something that comes up, I will either say, yes, check this out, or let me connect you with someone that has an answer on that. We have to be nodes for information for each other, right? I recently sent out an email to the Minnesota Bats and I said, I need a Teacher America teachers from Minnesota. Within 2 hours, I had 4 Teacher America teachers from Minnesota for a project that I'm working on, okay? And so that's very important that we stay connected, because we will never be able to match Allison on money. We will never be able to match the Koch brothers on money. But what we will be able to match them on is vibrancy, on focus, and with our people power.
And we just did protest last week. Had probably, I don't know, like 800 teachers down on the strip in front of the Venetian on purpose.
I saw on the back page. I saw. Love the. I actually like. There was one really good picture. A couple good pictures I tweeted. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really great.
And see, I was in California, but I knew that you were having that protest in front of the Venetian. I knew this.
Yeah, it is. It's great. I love it.
Actually, a friend of mine from high school is in town right now, and I went out with him last night, and he actually brought it up in conversation with me. The only stuff I posted about it was in bats. He couldn't see it. He lives in Minnesota, and he heard about it.
Exactly.
And
My
I thought that
massage
was
therapist said this is why you're too famous to come and get a massage, because I keep changing my appointments, and I had one originally for that Friday. He saw it on Fox News. He and I never talk about these things because we're like this.
She was interviewed a lot.
So,
Yeah.
Yes.
She was Patrick was. So this
Patrick
group worked with
They like this, don't they?
Alliance of Nevada.
So the thing, Sandoval and these other folks have the bully pulpit, right? And so where we can compete with them is by getting information, the right information to communities, instead of the misinformation that comes out of the governor's office here, that comes out of the Senate, etc. You have to get, I truly believe, that if we get the right information to people, that they will see through this top-down private control and privatization scheme. There are some people that just think that it's a great idea to profit off of education, but I don't think that most people have that belief.
So one of the, well, I was just gonna say, because you're talking about writing in the blog to specific issues. I've had an issue here that I know, like Denisha and Yohuru haven't gotten around to, that we've had conversations over time. One of the big issues here is that we have a Latino community and a Black community that, as a matter of fact, we had the Black Democratic Caucus, which was chartered under the Nevada State Democratic Party.
Senator Ford and all those folks.
Yeah, Yvette, I'm trying to remember her last name.
Yeah.
But they actually turned that whole group over into education reform, now sit next to Sandoval, and they are absolutely pushing for privatization,
right.
a lack of education. But
right.
I haven't seen anywhere where somebody has written about it that's a scholar that I can share that, because I'm not privy to have a conversation with them. They're not going to hear me, but I can send through social media and loop around and hope they get something from that topic.
Three things in this. One, I did a lecture at the recent AURA conference, which is our big education conference, about Black and Brown unity. So I can share that with you, and you can watch that lecture. And it's a conversation about those interactions between Black and Brown. I think that's an important conversation that we need to have.
And they compete in this town, because back when the Black Democratic Caucus was still with the Democratic Party and the Latino Democratic Party, I'm telling you, I would go to both meetings and they'd start talking about education, because I'm a teacher and I'm active. And this one over here is going, well, we need on the Board of Education another brown. And then over here we need Black. And I'm like, okay, what do they stand for?
Right. So.
And I'm like, you don't know, and they didn't know what they stood for.
So I think the important piece is, and that's something that has to happen here locally, right? You know, and I'm an outsider, so I'm not the person who can dictate that. But I interviewed legislators from Nevada, from Utah, from Texas, and a couple of states about this issue. I would check that out. I think the second issue is that it goes back to that Black folks and Latinos are not happy with the schools in their communities, and rightfully so. And so what the reformers have brilliantly done is said, well, look, here are these options, because it's existing ideology. Friedman, when he created vouchers, he said, we will do this to segregate schools. He said that very clearly, right? And so this was ideology that was created a long time ago for a different purpose. Now, it's been co-opted as a civil rights thing, so as charters and all those other things. But it's on us that we have to articulate a clear message to Black legislators and Latino legislators what the alternatives are, the democratic alternatives, the community-based alternatives. Because the reform side has led the way and said, we are the reformers. And that's why I say we are reformers too. We are just offering a different set of alternatives that are not about private control. So that's the second piece, is you have to offer them alternatives. You can't just say no. You cannot fight an agenda with nothing. And the final thing is that we cannot allow education reform to equal civil rights. Top-down private control is not civil rights. And in fact, if you look at Martin Luther King's writings, if you look at Cesar Chavez's writings, they were pro-union, pro-teacher association. They were anti-industrialist, anti-neoliberal. And those are the civil rights leaders that we should be looking up to. And I've written about this several times. Here's what, and I actually did a conversation with Cesar Chavez about education, using his quotes to answer questions about charters, vouchers, unions, etc. Our civil rights leaders, Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King, would be on our side. It's very clear that if you read their writings, they would be on their side. They would not be on the side of the Koch brothers. They would not be on the side of the Walton Foundation. They would not be on the side of Adelson. They would be on our side.
Yeah, screw that. Especially us. I'm sorry. Kind of messed up your Periscope a little bit.
Okay.
That was my quote, not his. So, yeah, that'd be great if you could send that, because that messaging is a huge issue, especially because we have the swing state going on and everything, and it really is based on having such a high Latino population, and they have a lot of parents that aren't getting it, but then you got parent leaders that are leading kind of down the right avenue, and it's like, okay,
and the thing is, you have to create alliances with community leaders. You have to have this conversation with pastors. There's a pastors organization in Texas that's very powerful on this issue. They understand, because when they did the parent trigger attack in Texas.
You said that before, Patrick, didn't you? When we talked a couple of meetings ago.
Yeah.
That was very.
When they did the parent trigger attack in Texas, they brought pastors, they brought community members. They had these really fancy cameras that I'm sure the Koch brothers paid for. They had fancy T-shirts, etc. But when I had conversations with the black parents and the pastors, and I said, look, this is a one-way street to privatization. If you're unhappy with the private control or the corporate control of your school, you can't come back. This legislation wasn't written, this parent trigger wasn't written to allow you to change your mind. So what choice is that really? And once you vote to turn over your school to a corporation, you no longer have democratic control of that school. And then the folks from the community started to understand what was really going on. That they've been hoodwinked, that they've been bamboozled, to use the language from the Malcolm X film from a few years back. And so the thing is that we have to give information to communities. They're upset about how they've been treated historically and how they're continuing to be treated. So we as educators have to help the faith community understand what's going on and provide them the right information. We have to provide leaders in our civil rights organizations. This is one of the reasons why I ran for election of the California NAACP. Because years back, the California NAACP supported Parent Trigger. And it was too late until they understood what it was really about. And so we passed resolutions about opting out, that the California NAACP now supports opt-out. We passed a resolution that the California NAACP supports multiple measures and against this high-stakes testing as a primary mechanism. We passed, before what happened in South Carolina, we passed a resolution a few weeks ago, the Sunday before what happened on Monday in South Carolina. We passed a resolution limiting the power of school resource officers in schools and providing, and part of the challenge with this is when you put Teach for America into classrooms and they haven't had training in classroom management, what do you think is going to happen with the students, the black and brown students in those classrooms? So one principal from New Orleans told me, he started with 2 students in the morning, and by the afternoon, Teach for America had sent him 40 black kids that they couldn't handle in their classrooms because they have no training in classroom management. They have a book. In fact, Teach for America has had headsets so that when they're in the classroom, that via the headset they can receive information how to manage their classroom. That's how poorly trained these teachers are, that they've got to feed them information over headsets to deal with classroom management in New Orleans, right? And so that's what we're facing. We are facing a set of policies that are clearly problematic and clearly failures, right? But yet they've reframed them as civil rights and in the best interests of poor kids, whether it be black, brown, white, etc. And so what we have to do is we have to get the right information to the community and provide them alternatives so that they cannot continue to hoodwink and bamboozle our communities.
Well, we talked about different ethnic backgrounds and their political action, what they want done. We have personal agendas for each different entity,
Sure.
which conflict with each other.
Sure, yeah.
And I came through the Martin Luther King and all the movement and the push. They had a common theme that ran through for everyone.
Sure.
And that's what we need to find,
Sure.
is to pull them all together under one.
Yeah.
And that's what we're having a problem with. We don't have those type of leaders that we used to
Sure.
have.
Sure.
And we have to step up and start saying, look, what is the common thing that each different entity has so that
Yeah.
you can unite them?
Yeah.
Because they're fighting with each other. And
That's
it's
right.
a ploy for anybody else
That's right.
that's outside the picture going like, privatization, we
Yeah.
need to do this.
Yeah.
Allow them to infight
Sure.
and divide them.
Sure.
They're gonna fall. And the thing that we had back in the 60s and
Okay.
70s, we had a vision where we wanted
That's
to
right.
go.
That's right.
We have
That's
not.
right. So I think I've introduced a vision that you can apply to your particular community and think about what policies you want as alternatives to these top-down approaches, right? And the issue is that you really raise is allies fighting with each other. And I'm going to tell you a secret about me that I've never told anybody. You guys ready for a secret that you never know? So I save my big guns for my opponents, not for my allies. Okay. So, and this is what I do. I'm going to tell you something. I've never told anybody. I go on YouTube and I type in battleship guns, and I actually watch battleships launching huge, like nighttime battleships, and that's how I think about my opponents. That's how I think about the people that I disagree with. Is I save my big guns for the privatizers. I save my big guns for those that want to privately control what I call the aristocratic reformers. Do I disagree with my allies sometimes? Right? I think we sometimes disagree on charter schools. We sometimes disagree on Common Core. But I save my big guns for my enemies, not for my allies. Now, can I disagree with my allies? Yes. But my big guns, my battleship guns, I don't know what are their size, they're huge, right? I save those for my enemies.
That's what's tearing us apart.
So I do think we need a common vision. I don't think we're always going to have a common vision. I don't think we're always going to agree on charter schools. Some people say no charter schools. I'm a person that believes in community-based charter schools, right? So save your big guns for the privatizers. Use your small 9mm for your, everybody's got guns around here, right? One of you might.
Yeah, these two are gun-toting.
I was going to say, you've been saying through this whole thing, you can't fight something with nothing. That's exactly what the National Rifle Association has been doing for the last 20 years, and it's worked.
Well, they're fighting with a load of money.
Well, I think this is
not really.
Well, this is a big issue. Let me just say this. Let me just say this one thing about Australia, which is that Australia had a school shooting where like 100 people died. They proceeded to ban all weapons except for, I think, hunting weapons. And you know how many school shootings they've had in the last couple of decades? Zero. So we only have two options.
But Australia doesn't have that kind of gun culture. They never have. No, they never have.
We have two options here.
Yeah, we have a security.
We have two options. Either A, we say only hunting weapons like England, or we say everybody has a gun and we just shoot at each other whenever, right? So those are really our only two options, because the options that we have right now are for this. And let me talk. I want to end this on a positive note. So let me talk about Hero. So my best friend, like I told you, teaches ESL in the Bay. And one day, I was watching CNN, and CNN says, teacher tackles would-be school bomber. And I looked at the school that he was at, and I said to myself, wow, that sounds like the school that my buddy teaches at. So I get on Facebook, and I even get teary-eyed when I think about it now. I message his wife and message him, but he never checks his Facebook, and I said, something happened at his school. Was that Kennan? And it was. He tackled the bomber. And that's why you never heard about it. That's why 10, 20 kids didn't die, because teachers are heroes. They are our heroes. They are our first responders. We should trust their judgment. We need to stop demonizing educators and realize that it's the policymakers that have failed us, not the teachers. Thank you.
Standing applause on that one.
Yes.
And we highly appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
Great knowledge for us to get more pivotal in our moving forward, especially because a lot of people in here are running for